Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're embarking on a mission, really, to understand the very foundations of how we even think about history, how it's written, and we're going right back to the source.
Yeah.
A singular figure who seems to cross continents, connects all these disparate cultures, and, forever blurred the lines between what we call rigorous reporting and just magnificent storytelling.
Yeah, we're diving deep into Herodotus of Halicarnassos, an ancient Greek thinker, traveler maybe, who earned this ultimate, indelible moniker from Cicero centuries later, Pater Historiae.
The father of history.
The father of history. But our goal today, I think, is to understand the paradox, that title.
Yeah.
And it's maybe not as straightforward as it sounds.
Absolutely. So Herodotus lived, roughly 490, maybe 480, down to 430 or 420 BC. And he wasn't just a chronicler, jotting down dates.
No.
He was a geographer, a traveler, we think, an ethnologist, and critically a political analyst. His single surviving work, the Histories, this immense text later split into 9 books. It's ostensibly about the rise of the massive Persian Empire.
Right.
And those pivotal Persian Wars in the early 5th century BC.
But if you just, pick it up expecting a dry military textbook, you're completely missing the point. It's cited as the founding document of Western historiography.
Yeah.
And yet it's this chaotic, gorgeous tapestry. It's got deep political theory, eyewitness travel reports, or, alleged reports, meticulous cultural observations, and yes, absolutely sections dedicated to fantastical creatures. It's all in there.
The scope of his vision was just staggering, wasn't it? His geographical horizon was basically the entire known world to the Greeks at the time, stretching out to what he called the fringe zones, those distant edges where apparently there was still room for fabulous creatures and just unbelievable customs.
Right, where the map gets a bit fuzzy.
Exactly. So our deep dive mission today is really to unpack this beautiful, maybe contradictory blend of knowledge and narrative and figure out how this specific work became the indispensable baseline for telling the story of human conflict and culture. Okay, so let's start with the man himself, Herodotus. The first great historian was, maybe inevitably, a man of movement. Displacement, even.
That's right. He was born in Halicarnassos, that's modern Bodrum in Turkey, over in Asia Minor.
But his personal history was immediately tangled up in some pretty high-stakes regional politics.
Oh, so?
Well, his family was apparently deeply involved in opposing the local dynastic ruler, a guy named Epnyms. And this wasn't just, quiet disagreement.
Right.
This was serious political opposition, the kind that cost people their homes, maybe their lives. By the 460s BC, this actually led to Herodotus being forced into exile. He ended up on the island of Samos.
So shaped by political turmoil right from the start. An outsider, almost.
Exactly, defined by being pushed out. Now, he did manage to return, briefly, after Epnyms fell from power.
But it didn't last. By the mid-450s BC, Herodotus left Halicarnassos for good. And look, based on his own detailed accounts in the Histories, he seems to have spent the better part of his life as this incredibly serious, diligent world traveler, just constantly gathering information, asking questions. Historia meant inquiry back then.
And the list of places he claims to have visited is just huge.
It really is. It reflects the universal scope he was aiming for in his work. He talks about extensive journeys deep into Egypt, all across the Black Sea area, through Thrace and Macedonia, way up into Scythia, across the Near East to Babylon.
Which is fascinating, given his main topic is the Persian conflict.
Right, because the one place he likely never actually visited was proper Persia itself, the heartland.
So his info on the core of the empire was secondhand.
Seems like it. Drawn from other sources, people he met along the way, maybe officials in Persian-controlled territories, not from walking the streets of Susa himself, probably.
Okay, and this is where it gets really interesting, isn't it? This is where that scholarly controversy kicks in. The one that's kind of dogged his reputation for, millennia.
Yeah, the so-called liar school.
The liar school. Tell us about that.
Well, it's this persistent group of researchers going way back, but also quite strong in modern scholarship, who seriously question whether these epic travels actually happened. They suggest he might have been more of an armchair scholar, someone who maybe never really left the Greek-speaking world or didn't travel nearly as much as he claimed.
And fabricated the journeys. Why? To give his work more authority.
That's the argument. In an era transitioning from purely oral tradition, where the speaker's presence and personal experience were everything, claiming you saw the pyramids, you spoke to the priests, you witnessed these Scythian rituals, that adds instant credibility to your written account. So, was it deceit? Or was it perhaps a kind of literary device, a way to establish narrative authority?
That's a crucial tension we have to grapple with. If you made up the travel, does it undermine the history?
It certainly complicates it, but it doesn't necessarily negate the value of the information he compiled or the way he structured it. Whether he got it firsthand in Egypt or secondhand in Athens, he still presented it.
And maybe the act of compilation and analysis is the historical contribution, regardless of the travel claims?
Perhaps. And it's not like he wasn't meticulous in other ways. You mentioned calculations.
Yeah, like measuring the distance from Elvosos to Susa. 14,040 stadia, he says. That sounds pretty specific, not like someone just making things up wholesale.
It does. It highlights that paradox again. He's got this rational Greek impulse to measure, to quantify, to impose order on space and time, but he combines it with the narrative techniques of maybe an epic poet, where wonder, personal witness, and a good story hold enormous sway.
So where was he based when he wasn't supposedly trekking across the known world?
Well, we know he spent significant time in Athens. Yeah. Athens was the intellectual hub, and he gave these incredibly popular public lectures there. He'd read sections of his ongoing research aloud, what he called historian sections, or logoi. Think of them as like work-in-progress presentation.
And these weren't just small gatherings in someone's house, were they?
Oh, no. These were major cultural events by all accounts. Yeah. Highly anticipated, well-attended, and the fact that he was paid for them speaks volumes.
Paid how much?
Well, there's this famous account, maybe slightly legendary, but probably based in truth, that the Athenians awarded him a gift of 10 talents.
10 talents? Yeah. That's astronomical, isn't it?
It's a staggering sum for the time. Enough to live comfortably for years. It tells you he wasn't just some niche storyteller. He was a massive public intellectual, commanding attention and compensation on par with the most famous sophists.
Wow. So a real celebrity scholar. And where did he end up? Did he go back to Halicarnassos?
No, he never went back there permanently. His final resting place sort of reflects his cosmopolitan life. His second adopted hometown became the colony of Thucydides.
Thucydides. Where's that?
It was a pan-Hellenic colony founded in 444 or 443 BC, down on the Gulf of Tarent in what's now southern Italy. A planned community, actually, with some big names involved in its design.
Okay.
And it was likely there, in Thucydides, that he completed the final version, the monumental structure of the Histories as we know it. And later tradition says his grave was displayed there. So his life journey, from political exile to celebrated intellectual based in Italy, was just as expansive, really, as the world he tried to document.
Okay, let's shift focus now directly onto the text itself, the Histories.
Yeah.
Its vision is just sweeping.
It really is. Even today, it's recognized for its astonishing size and its immense, pretty much unprecedented scope for its time.
Yeah.
I mean, no other ancient author we know of made such a sustained, deliberate effort to capture the sheer variety of the known world. He wasn't just interested in Greece or Persia.
I wanted everything.
Everything. The diverse peoples, the habitats they lived in, their complex and often bizarre customs, their cultural achievements, their histories. Yeah. It's all crammed in there.
And that universal perspective is exactly why it feels weirdly relevant now, isn't it?
Absolutely. The scholar Wolfgang Will made this point quite strongly, that the Histories has this renewed relevance in our times. Herodotus was describing a world defined by a mixture of ethnicities with their conflicting orders. Does that sound familiar? It sounds remarkably like the post-bipolar world we're living in right now, struggling to make sense of vast cultural differences colliding within a single, interconnected global system.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
And this universalism, it extended to who he included in the story, too, which is striking.
How so?
Well, especially when you compare him to his famous successor, Thucydides. What immediately jumps out is Herodotus' surprising inclusion of women.
Ah, yes, that's true.
In a world of ancient literature that's overwhelmingly dominated by male public life, war, politics, philosophy, Herodotus actually made sure women were visible. Someone counted. Over 200 women actively doing things in the narratives, and over 300 others mentioned by name or role.
That's quite remarkable for the period. He didn't erase half the population, even if their roles were often viewed through a male lens.
Exactly. So what was his stated goal? What did he say he was trying to do with this massive book?
Well, he lays it out right at the beginning in the Proemium, the preface. And his central theme is, on the surface, deceptively simple.
Okay.
He says his ultimate goal was to ensure that the great deeds, the erga of both Greeks and barbarians, were not forgotten by time. to preserve their memory.
Both sides. That's important. Not just Greek glory.
Crucially, both sides. And most importantly, he wanted to explain why they went to war against each other. Dihon aston epolemizan aloisi. For what cause they waged war on one another.
So it's not just chronicle, it's causal explanation.
Precisely. That's the huge leap. He wasn't just recording events like an analyst. He was asking the foundational historical question, why did this happen?
And the narrative itself, the time frame, it covers about 80 years,
Yeah.
in context.
Roughly, yeah. It provides the necessary historical backstory, moving from the rise of Cyrus the Great, the founder of the Persian Empire, all the way through to the climactic failure of Xerxes' massive invasion of Greece, ending with the Greek victories at Plataea and Mycale around 479 BC.
And we touched on this before, but he was incredibly sophisticated, wasn't he, about his approach to chronology. He didn't just pretend everything was equally certain.
Not at all. He had this concept, which feels quite modern, of graded accuracy, a kind of methodological self-awareness.
How did that work?
He basically signals to his audience, sometimes implicitly, sometimes more explicitly, that his chronological accuracy is highest for events that happen closer to home, geographically and temporally, events in or near Greece, events closer to his own time.
Makes sense.
And conversely, he acknowledges, or seems to accept, that accuracy necessarily decreases the further he gets from that core Greek experience further back in time, or further away geographically, like deep in Egypt or Scythia.
But his ambition for deep time was still relentless, even if he knew the details got fuzzier. He didn't just stick to the recent past.
No way! He wasn't content with just the 80 years of the main conflict. He pushed deep into the past, especially using the records he claimed he accessed through Egyptian priests.
Right, the Egyptian connection.
Yeah, he was attempting this massive foundational history. He compiled these Egyptian king lists and records that he claimed totaled something like 11,340 years.
Wow.
Covering what he said were 341 earlier rulers now.
That sounds a bit questionable.
It's highly questionable to modern scholars. Given his reliance on translation, the potential for misunderstanding, the priest's own agendas, it's probably not accurate history in our sense.
But the attempt itself.
Exactly. The calculation itself, the sheer ambition of it, reveals the depth of his inquiry. He wasn't satisfied with just recent events. He was seeking the entire foundational backstory, the prehistory almost, of the clash between East and West.
And he applied that same kind of diligence to space, too, not just time.
Right. He wasn't just drawing philosophical maps in his head. He was interested in practical geography, measurement. You see this in those meticulous calculations of distances.
Like the Ephesus to Susa one.
Like the 14,040 stadia from the Greek coast at Ephesus all the way to the Persian administrative heartland at Susa. He wanted to quantify the world he was describing.
So there it is again, the core paradox.
Yep. The historian who carefully calculates the precise number of stadia on a major imperial road.
Is the same guy who tells us about dog-sized ants digging for gold in India.
Exactly. That constant tension between the impulse towards verifiable quantitative metrics and the pull of these incredible qualitative stories, wonders, and marvels, that's what gives the Histories its unique energy and, honestly, its enduring fascination.
Okay, so this tension is absolutely critical when we start talking about his actual methodology. How did he get all this stuff?
Well, fundamentally, Herodotus was a compiler, a collector. He gathered reports, stories, accounts logoi over many years, and his sources were incredibly varied. Local chronologists, maybe priests, traders he met in port cities, soldiers who'd served in campaigns, adventurers, maybe even just, people he bumped into during his travels or in Athens. A real mix.
So his method was a combination of things.
Yeah, it seems to be. He talks about personal investigation, seeing things with his own eyes, opsis, critical reflection, using his judgment gnome. But there was also a huge reliance on akuthi things he heard, reports passed down to him.
And that hearing part, the akud, that's where things get tricky, right? Speculation creeps in.
It inevitably does. He often had to weigh conflicting accounts or fill in gaps based on what seemed plausible, what was probable. Ikus, the likely story.
And it's fascinating, as you said, that the debate over his credibility isn't just a modern thing. People were arguing about this almost immediately.
Oh, yeah. Continuously, right from antiquity. About 450 years after Herodotus wrote, Plutarch, a major figure himself, famously wrote an essay called On the Malice of Herodotus. basically calling him an outright liar and trying to systematically discredit his account of the Persian Wars, especially regarding certain Greek states.
Wow, malice. That's strong.
It is. And as we discussed, that connects directly to the modern liar school, who echo Plutarch's skepticism, suggesting those claimed travel experiences and maybe even some key sources are primarily fictional literary constructs, tools to make the story better or more authoritative.
So we really have to ask the hard question now. If Plutarch called him a liar, if modern scholars think key parts were fabricated, does that push the histories more towards being great literature than reliable history?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah. Or maybe the storytelling served a deeper historical function in its own context.
I lean towards the latter. I think it served a crucial transitional function. You have to remember the context. He was operating right at the cusp, moving from a primarily oral culture where history was fluid, performed, remembered through spoken word.
Like Homer.
Exactly. Towards a written culture. Think about those public lectures, the logoi. He was often writing to be heard, even if it was eventually written down.
Okay.
So the structure of his work reflects that. It allows for the seamless integration of all these diverse, often contradictory oral testimonies he collected. He could just say, the Egyptians told me this, but the priests at Dodona say that.
Ah. So in a way, the vast, messy, maybe unreliable oral tradition found its perfect mouthpiece in Herodotus. He captured that spoken world.
I think that's a great way to put it. He captured and, crucially, preserved these diverse local histories, these different perspectives that might otherwise have been lost.
But the act of writing it down also kind of froze it, limited future changes.
Precisely. It's a double-edged sword. He preserves it, but he also fixes it in a way that oral tradition never is. However, this heavy reliance on oral accounts, often gathered through translators, remember, he famously didn't speak Egyptian, relied on interpreters,
Right.
That inevitably led to verifiable errors. Mistakes in distances sometimes, wildly questionable troop numbers for Xerxes' army, maybe confusion in the specific chronology of events in the Near East, things we can now check against other evidence.
It seems like he almost used mythology or traditional story patterns to kind of manage all this chaotic input.
That's a very insightful point. When faced with this overwhelming mass of often contradictory factual content, especially from foreign cultures, incorporating familiar mythological frameworks or recognizable narrative structures could provide his Greek audience with a way to process it all. Familiar patterns to make sense of the unfamiliar.
But that mixes the factual impulse rubbing up against the need for a good, understandable story. That's what led later critics to get frustrated, right?
Absolutely. Later, more analytically minded historians, starting perhaps with Thucydides but continuing through the ages, they wanted clear distinctions. They tried to carve him up.
Also,
They'd tried to split him into historian Herodotus, the serious chronicler of the wars, and ethnographer Herodotus, the guy who just reported interesting cultural tidbits. Or, less generously, they just dismissed the ethnographic parts as Herodotus the prattler, the gossip who just repeated whatever tall tale he heard in the marketplace.
and that prattler label probably stuck because he deliberately did spice up the work with incredibly entertaining, sometimes clearly semi-fictional anecdotes. He knew how to keep an audience hooked.
Oh, absolutely. He was a master storyteller. Think of that incredibly elaborate, almost novelistic tale of the Egyptian master thief who keeps outwitting the pharaoh. It goes on for pages.
Right, or the one everyone remembers. The giant dog-sized gold-digging ants in India.
Yes. That story instantly established India in the Greek imagination as this fantastical wonderland at the edge of the earth. Pure narrative gold, pardon the pun.
And he also gave us that fascinating, very early description of what anthropologists now call silent trade.
That's right. The account of Punic sailors trading for gold with Libyan or possibly black African traders on the West African coast. They'd leave goods on the beach, retreat, the locals would leave gold, they'd come back. All done without speaking, based on trust. It's an amazing snapshot.
These details just stick in your mind. They make the history vivid.
They do, and this flair for the dramatic, the memorable, the sometimes unbelievable, that's what stands in such stark contrast to his immediate successor, Thucydides.
Right. Thucydides took a very different path.
Consciously different. Thucydides, writing his history of the Peloponnesian War, was aiming for methodological purity, almost scientific accuracy as he understood it. He sought absolute critical verification. If he heard multiple versions of an event, he'd analyze them and present only the single version he judged most plausible.
Whereas Herodotus was happy to give you multiple versions.
Often, yes, he'd say, the Persians claim X happened this way, But the Phoenicians disagree and say why. He lays out the conflicting traditions.
Thucydides famously said he wanted his work to be a katoma sia, a lasting possession for future statesmen to learn from, not a janisma est tu parodica aquain, a showpiece for a one-time hearing.
Exactly. He was taking a direct shot at Herodotus' style, his popular lectures, his entertaining digressions.
And yet, ironically, Herodotus created a showpiece that became a lasting possession, maybe because of its breadth, its drama, its human interest.
Precisely. Thucydides might be the historian's historian, but Herodotus understood something fundamental. To make history matter, to make it endure in cultural memory, you have to make it memorable. You need the stories, even the questionable ones.
Okay, let's pivot now to another major facet of Herodotus. Herodotus as, arguably, the first great cultural theorist.
Yeah, this is a really important lens. For him, history wasn't just about kings and battles. It was inseparable from the environment, the land. He saw geography not just as a stage, but as a critical factor shaping the culture, the customs, the nomoi of the people who lived there.
And this comes through in how he even conceived of the world map, right?
Definitely. His view was quite different from ours. He proposed only two primary continents, Europe and Asia.
Only two? What about Africa?
He considered Libya, basically, North Africa, as known to the Greeks as fundamentally part of Asia. And the boundary he drew between Europe and Asia was strictly defined by water.
How did that line run?
It started at the Pillars of Heracles, the Strait of Gibraltar, then ran through the Mediterranean, up through the Dardanelles, the Bosporus, across the Black Sea. And crucially, he included the Caspian Sea in this line. He correctly identified the Caspian as an inland sea, not connected to the outer ocean, which was a major geographical insight for his time.
Okay. And as his mental map stretched out towards the edges, towards these remote fringe zones, that's where things get weird again.
That's where the facts, or what he presented as facts, start to yield ground to fantasy, to myth. It's at the edges of the known world, Scythia, India, Ethiopia, Libya, that he places the griffins guarding hoards of gold, the stories of the one-eyed Arimaspians who supposedly steal the gold from them.
The Fantasticus fills the vacuum of knowledge.
Exactly. It populates the blank spaces on the map. Now, it's important to note, Herodotus himself often expresses skepticism about these tales.
Oh, he does?
Yeah, he'll often say, I haven't seen this myself, this is what I was told, or I find this hard to believe, but this is the story. He cites indirect sources. He maintains a degree of critical distance.
But he still tells the stories.
Oh, absolutely. He clearly enjoys them. He can't resist the narrative power of the unbelievable, like that story about the Libyan girls who supposedly scoop gold dust from a lake using bird feathers covered in sticky pitch. It's just too good a story not to include.
And these fantastical stories served a purpose too, maybe, defining the limits.
I think so. They define the edges of the oikoumene, the inhabited world, and maybe, by contrast, reinforce the sense of Greek centrality, Greek rationality. Like how weird things get out there.
But the real core of his cultural analysis isn't the fantasy, it's his incredibly detailed ethnographic observations. Right? His völkerkundliche accounts, as the Germans would say.
Absolutely. That's the heart of it. He meticulously documented the customs, the laws, the habits, the religious practices of seemingly every group encountered by the Persians or by the Greeks.
And he weaves these details right into the main historical narrative.
Constantly. For example, during Xerxes' massive invasion of Greece, Herodotus pauses the military action for this enormous troop review at a place called Doriskos. And he uses it as an opportunity to give you a detailed ethnographic catalog of practically every contingent in Xerxes' multinational army, their clothes, their weapons, their origins, sometimes their weird habits.
It's like an anthropological appendix embedded in a war story.
Pretty much. And crucially, these observations weren't about creating some kind of racial hierarchy, not in the way we think of it later.
No. What was the point then?
It seems more about cultural contrast. By examining the bizarre, the reversed, sometimes the horrifying behaviors of others, he was subtly prompting his Greek audience to think about their own customs, to question the assumed stability and universality of their own nomoi.
How so?
Well, scholars have analyzed this quite effectively. His work seems to convey this almost disturbing idea that as you get further and further away from the Greek civilized center, all the core features that structure a society, personal identity, how people communicate, family structures, how they care for the dead, they all begin to dissolve or become inverted. It highlights the fragility, maybe, of Greek civilization itself.
Okay, let's get into some specifics. Give us some of those really shocking customs he detailed, the ones that would have truly jolted his Greek readers.
Right. We can start with gender roles, just profound reversals of Greek norms. In Egypt, he reports, maybe accurately, maybe not, that women went to the marketplace and conducted trade while the men stayed home leaving.
The complete opposite of Athens.
Totally. Or among the Lycians in Asia Minor, he says they traced their lineage through their mothers. Children were named after their mothers, not their fathers. And legal status apparently followed the female line, a matrilineal system. Baffling and probably threatening to Athenian patriarchy.
Okay, what about sex and marriage? He gets pretty explicit there too, doesn't he?
Oh, yeah. He seems fascinated by the sheer variety of sexual and familial arrangements, things that would challenge every Greek taboo. Among the Massagea, a nomadic people near the Caspian Sea, he claims women were held as communal property.
Communal? How did that work?
Apparently, when a man desired intercourse with a particular woman, he just hung his quiver, his bow case, on her wagon. That was the public signal. No marriage, just open access.
Wow. Okay. Keep going.
Even stranger, maybe. The Nasamones in Libya. He says they signaled intercourse by placing a staff upright outside the dwelling door. And get this, at weddings, it was customary for all the male guests in turn to have intercourse with the bride.
Good grief.
And then there were the Osirs, another Libyan group, who supposedly abandoned marriage altogether. Children were raised communally, and paternity was only determined later, when the child grew older, by checking who they resembled among the men.
It's like he's presenting this entire universe of social organization that's just completely alien.
Absolutely. Designed, perhaps, to make his readers think, wow, anything is possible.
But maybe the most visceral examples, the ones that hit the deepest taboos, relate to how different cultures handled death.
Without a doubt. That's where the cultural spectrum gets truly wide and often horrifying for a Greek sensibility. He documented this vast range of practices. It starts, maybe relatively mildly, with certain Indian groups who, he claims, simply abandon their sick and old relatives out in the wilderness to die alone. No care, no burial.
Okay, that's grim, but it gets worse.
Much worse. He describes the Padai, another Indian group, who allegedly killed and ate their sick family members.
Ate them. Why?
The rationale, according to Herodotus' report, was that if the person died of illness, their flesh would be spoiled. So they killed them first, while still relatively healthy, to ensure the meat was good. Utilitarian cannibalism.
That's beyond words.
Well,
What else?
moving north to the Isidones, a Scythian people, they also practiced a form of funerary cannibalism, but with a twist of reverence. They would eat their dead fathers,
Okay.
but they would mix the father's flesh with cattle meat, kind of like a ritual feast. And then they would carefully clean the father's skull, cover it in gold, and keep it as a sacred cult object, using it for sacrifices.
So a bizarre mix of consumption and veneration? That would have absolutely horrified the Greeks, who are so meticulous about proper burial rites.
Totally, but reverence took other forms too. He describes the lavish burials of Scythian kings, vast amounts of gold treasure buried with them, along with strangled servants, concubines, horses, everything they'd need in the afterlife, dispatched to accompany them.
And then there were the Ethiopians with their strange coffins.
Yeah, the Macrobian Ethiopians. He reports this incredibly weird practice where they would mummify the dead body, then encase it in a hollow pillar made of some kind of transparent crystal or glass-like substance. Transparent, so you could see the body inside. And they would keep this pillar upright in the house for a whole year, making sacrifices to it as if the person were still part of the family, before eventually moving it outside the city. It's this exhaustive, challenging, often contradictory catalog of how humans deal with mortality.
Okay, so all these examples, gender, sex, death, they all build towards what you could call the ultimate philosophical takeaway of this whole ethnographic section. And he delivers it through that very famous anecdote about King Darius, right?
Exactly. It's the foundational story, really, for cultural relativism in Western thought. The setup is simple but brilliant. King Darius of Persia is at his court. He gathers some of the Greeks who are present and asks them a hypothetical question. What amount of money would it take for you to be willing to eat the bodies of your dead fathers?
And the Greeks
react with utter horror, disgust, violent refusal. They say no amount of money could ever make them do such a monstrous thing.
Okay. Then what?
Then Darius brings in some members of an Indian tribe called the Kalatir, who, Herodotus tells us, do have the custom of eating their dead parents. Darius asks them, through an interpreter, what amount of money would persuade them to adopt the Greek custom of burning their dead parents on a funeral pyre.
And the calatir.
They cry out in protest. They tell Darius not to even speak of such an impious, godless act, burning their ancestors unthinkable.
The perfect symmetry.
Exactly. The implication is massive, and Herodotus states it clearly. Every single nation, every culture, holds its own customs, its nomos, supreme, as sacred, as obviously right and universally valid for them.
And this confirmed what the poet Pindar had already said.
Yes. Herodotus quotes Pindar approvingly. Nomos pantun basilios. Custom, or law, or convention, is king of all. And we should pause on that Greek word nomos. It's not just custom, like table manners.
It's deeper.
It's deeper. It's the whole web of inherited morality, tradition, law, religious practice, the unwritten constitution of a society. Sittengesetzlichkeit, as the Germans might translate it, the inherent rightness of customary morality. Pindar and Herodotus are saying that is the highest, most powerful authority in human affairs, more powerful than reason, maybe even more powerful than kings.
So Herodotus was essentially holding this incredibly powerful mirror up to his Athenian audience, up to the Greeks generally, and saying, look how incredibly strange the rest of the world seems to you.
Right.
Now realize that your ways, your nomoi, are just as absolutely strange, just as incomprehensible, maybe even horrifying to everyone else.
That profound realization, that ability to step outside your own cultural assumptions, that's the mark of the first great cultural theorist. It's an astonishing intellectual achievement for the 5th century BC.
Okay, moving from culture now to high politics. There's this growing recognition, isn't there, that Herodotus wasn't just a chronicler of battles or a collector of customs. He was also a really profound political interpreter.
Yes, absolutely. Particularly, he's being reevaluated now as a sharp analyst and critic of imperialist politics. You have to remember, he was writing during a period when Athenian imperial power was reaching its peak after the Persian Wars.
So his critique of Persia might have had contemporary relevance for Athens.
Very likely. He was providing this universal warning about the nature of power itself, applicable to any empire, Greek or barbarian.
And what was the core message? What did he see as the fundamental problem with empire?
The message is incredibly consistent throughout the histories. It's the idea of the temptation of power. Unchecked power, especially imperial power, inevitably, inexorably leads to unjust expansion, to overreach.
And that leads to
destruction, ruin, for all parties involved, eventually. He shows again and again how rulers, seduced by power and ambition, consistently prioritize their own raw self-interest. They ignore treaties, they disregard morality, they break oaths, all for short-term gain or glory.
And this overwhelming power, it has a psychological effect too, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It leads to hybris.
Exactly. Hybris, that fatal flaw of arrogance, presumption, outrageous behavior. It's where rulers start to violate the natural order, the moral order, the religious norms. They begin to believe they're superior to fate, maybe even to the gods themselves.
And this isn't just a personal failing of one or two bad kings.
No, Herodotus seems to suggest it's almost institutionalized. It's inherent in the structure of absolute unchecked power. Empire breeds hybris.
And we see this tragic arc played out repeatedly in his major characters.
Again and again, Croesus, the fabulously wealthy king of Lydia, is maybe the prime example early on.
Tell us about Croesus.
He gets this ambiguous prophecy from the oracle at Delphi. If he attacks the rising Persian Empire, he will destroy a great empire. Yeah, his arrogance, his hybris, blinds him. He assumes the prophecy means he'll destroy Persia. He attacks and destroys his own great Lydian empire.
And he only learns his lesson afterwards.
Only after his catastrophic defeat, when he's captured by Cyrus. He finally remembers the wisdom of the Athenian sage Solon, who had visited him earlier and warned him that you can't call any person truly happy or fortunate until you see how their life ends. Croesus learned it far too late.
Okay, who else? Cyrus the Great. He's usually seen as a wise founder.
Mostly wise, yes. But even Cyrus shows moments of this petty, hybristic vengeance that power allows. There's that story where one of his sacred white horses drowns while trying to cross the Gindas River.
So what does Cyrus do? Warn the horse?
No. He gets angry at the river. He decides to punish the river itself for its insolence.
Punish a river? How?
He orders his entire army to spend months digging 360 channels to divert the river's water, essentially destroying it, making it weak. His stated goal was to make it so feeble that even women could cross it without getting their knees wet.
That's insane. It's pure peak.
It's the first step towards hybris. Believing that your human ambition, your anger, can overpower and redirect nature itself just because you're the king.
But the absolute quintessential example of hybris has to be Xerxes, right? during the invasion of Greece.
Oh, absolutely. Xerxes is hybris personified in many ways. The most famous incident, of course, is when a massive storm destroys his newly built pontoon bridges across the Hellespont Strait, connecting Asia to Europe.
What does he do? Just order a rebuild?
If only. No, he flies into a rage. He orders the Hellespont itself, the sea, to be whipped with 300 lashes.
What's the sea?
Whipped the sea and had fetters thrown into it and had it branded. His men were shouting insults at the water as they did it, saying things like, "Our master imposes this penalty on you for wronging him," basically claiming the sea should submit to the great king's will.
It's an unforgettable image. A mortal man trying to physically punish and dominate the elements. Pure madness.
Complete madness. And just to underscore his arbitrary, tyrannical cruelty, he simultaneously ordered the executioners to behead the engineers who had built the original bridges. He punishes both nature and the human experts who tried and failed to master it for him. It shows how quickly absolute power degrades into paranoid, irrational violence.
And there are other examples too, right?
Yeah.
Like Periander in Corinth.
Yes, another classic tyrant story. Periander of Corinth supposedly sent a messenger to Thrasybulus, the tyrant of Miletus, asking for advice on the best way to maintain his rule securely.
And what was the advice?
Thrasybulus didn't say a word. He just took the messenger for a walk through a field of grain and systematically lopped off all the tallest, most outstanding ears of wheat, leveling the field. Symbolic.
The messenger reported this back to Periander, who understood the silent message immediately.
Which would eliminate the competition. Cut down the tallest ears of grain in the state, meaning cruelly murder or expel every significant, talented, potentially rival personality in Corinth. Get rid of anyone who stands out. The instinct of unchecked power is always paranoid elimination of perceived threats.
Okay, so this incredibly deep, critical analysis of the pathology of power, it leads directly into one of the most surprising and intellectually crucial sections in the entire Histories, doesn't it?
Absolutely. The famous constitutional debate, which appears rather bizarrely in Book 3.
Where does it fit in the narrative?
It's presented as a conversation taking place among 7 Persian noblemen who have just successfully conspired to assassinate a usurper to the Persian throne, the Magian known as Pseudo-Smerdis. Before they decide who among them should be the next king, they supposedly pause to have this philosophical debate about the best form of government for Persia.
A philosophical debate among Persian conspirators. That sounds unlikely.
Highly unlikely as a historical event. It's almost certainly Herodotus inserting a piece of contemporary Greek political discourse into his Persian narrative. It reflects the kinds of debates happening in Athens and other Greek cities in his own time.
Okay. So what are the options they debate?
They lay out the 3 core political forms known to the Greeks. First, one of the conspirators, Otanes, makes a passionate argument for democracy.
Democracy in Persia. What's his argument?
His argument is entirely based on rejecting the alternative. He details all the evils of monarchy, how absolute power inevitably corrupts even the best man, leading to envy, arrogance, hybris again, violence, lawlessness, and injustice. He champions instead isonomia, equality before the law, plus election of officials by lot, and holding magistrates accountable to the people. Basically the key tenets of Athenian-style democracy.
Okay, so Otanes wants democracy. Who speaks next?
Next up is Megabizos. He agrees with Otanes that monarchy is terrible, but he's equally scathing about democracy. He argues that the demos, the unrestrained masses, are ignorant, fickle, arrogant, and prone to violence like a river in flood. Giving power to the mob is just chaos.
So what's his solution?
Oligarchy. Or, more specifically, aristocracy. Rule by a select group of the best men, Aristoi, the most virtuous and capable citizens. They, he argues, will make the wisest decisions for the state.
Makes sense as an alternative. And finally,
Darius, who, spoiler alert, will become the next king, makes the case for monarchy.
his own future job. How does he argue for it?
He argues quite cunningly that even the absolute best version of oligarchy or democracy is inherently flawed. Oligarchy, he says, always devolves into destructive personal rivalries, factions, and internal conflict stasis, leading to bloodshed until a monarch takes over.
And democracy.
Democracy, he claims, inevitably leads to corruption, collusion among bad leaders, and inefficiency, until eventually the people themselves demand a single strong man, a champion, to rise up and restore order. Meaning, popular rule is just a temporary, unstable detour that always loops back to monarchy in the end. Therefore, the rule of the single best man, the ideal monarch, is the most stable and effective form.
It's a pretty compelling argument, especially from the perspective of someone who wants to be king.
It is. And historically, in Herodotus's narrative, Darius wins the debate. The conspirators agree that monarchy is the best path for Persia.
But Herodotus, being the subtle political analyst that he is, he doesn't just leave it there, does he? He adds a final twist.
He cannot resist. He delivers this final, absolutely stinging dose of irony about how Darius actually secures the throne.
Right, it wasn't just philosophical agreement.
Not at all. After this incredibly elevated, rational debate about the philosophical merits of different constitutions, the actual selection of which one of the 7 conspirators will be the next great king, the ruler of the vast Persian Empire. It's decided by sheer political maneuvering and outright trickery.
The horses.
The horses. They agree that the man whose horse neighs first at sunrise the next morning will become king, and Darius's clever stable master arranges for Darius's horse to neigh on cue, either by using the scent of a mare or some other trick.
So the whole basis of the new monarchy rests on a rigged horse contest.
Exactly. That detail completely undercuts the nobility of the preceding philosophical debate. It's Herodotus showing you, with a sly wink, that even in the supposedly best form of government, power is ultimately secured not by inherent virtue or philosophical superiority or divine right, but by calculation, cunning, and manipulation. It's a profoundly cynical and probably quite realistic political observation that resonates even today. Hashtag, outro.
So if we try to bring all these threads together now, our deep dive really reveals Herodotus' legacy is just stunningly multifaceted, isn't it?
It really is. He wasn't just the chronicler of the Persian Wars, though he did that masterfully.
No. He was also a geographer, mapping a world both physically and culturally that he may or may not have fully traversed himself.
Right. He was this complex historian caught right in that messy, fascinating transition from reliance on oral testimony, with all its richness and unreliability, towards the demands of a rigorous written record.
And critically, as we explored, he was this amazing precursor to modern cultural theory, using the shock of foreign customs, the otherness of the world, to implicitly critique the blind spots and assumptions of his own Greek society.
And let's not forget the political analyst, the one who charted that tragic, seemingly inevitable arc from unchecked power to hybris, overreach, and eventual ruin. He saw the patterns in empire.
It's this incredible combination that explains why his influence has been so enduring, why he's still read and debated 2,500 years later, why we still commemorate him, even, naming things like the asteroid 3092 Herodotus or the Herodotus crater on the moon.
His work just keeps offering new layers, new perspectives.
Yeah, and Herodotus himself offered this incredibly timeless, chilling observation on the fundamental cost of imperial ambition, on the way war turns the world upside down.
Which one is that?
He stated quite simply that in peacetime, sons bury their fathers. But in wartime, fathers bury their sons.
Oof. Yeah, that hits hard. It reverses the natural order entirely.
It does. So we want to leave you, our listeners, with a final thought based on that. Consider this fundamental truth about the cost, the consequence of imperial expansion. This pattern Herodotus observed so clearly 2.5 millennia ago. What does it tell you about the enduring logic, maybe the enduring tragedy of power conflicts today?
And maybe ask yourself, what happens when leaders like Xerxes mistake their own personal ambition, that drive to punish a river or whip the sea or eliminate the tallest years? What happens when they mistake that for legitimate destiny, for the good of the state?
That's the essential recurring tension Herodotus forces us to confront, isn't it? Between power and its limits, between ambition and consequence. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the complex world of the father of history.